keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
Welcome in to another edition of Coffee Break. It is a Tuesday, which means we have the pleasure of being joined by NFL insider, newsbreaker, hair ambassador, James Palmer. James, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good, Richie. What's going on, man? It's a busy day. Busy day on a Tuesday.
It's
a Tuesday, and and the Jets are on a bye, but they're going to do something, right? Woody's going to do something.
Yeah. So why don't we start there? Why don't you fill us in on the busy morning that's happening over at One Jets Drive?
Yeah, Fulham Park is a mess. Let's just be honest. Yeah, it looks worse than the performance they had against the Broncos in that slop that Denver ended up beating them in.
Mm-hmm.
It's first the head coach, Robert Saleh, I believe it was like week 5, which we were all shocked that ended up happening. Woody Johnson pulling the trigger there. He's always made it abundantly clear that he is not the one that hired Robert Saleh. I believe he told Robert that when he arrived back with the team 4 years ago when, obviously he was working as the ambassador to the UK for the first Trump administration. There's many people believe Woody Johnson will be departing in some sort of political role again and be at arm's length from the team moving forward. Just talking on Bleacher Report and seeing the chats, that would be the wish of many Jets fans, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure they have no opinions on it at all.
Yeah, not at all. Nobody in New York has an opinion on this. But Joe Douglas, the general manager, has been fired. His contract wasn't going to expire at the end of this year. Many believe that he was going to be let go when this season ended, because usually you hire the head coach and the general manager together. He had already been part of Adam Gase's group, and then he ends up being part of hiring Robert Saleh. Joe Douglas does, and now they're going to start fresh with the new head coach, new GM. But the interesting part, Rich, is honestly, why now? Why do it as a head for your general manager right now? There really doesn't seem to be a point. My assumption and somewhat educated guess asking around is there's two pretty big things that make changes in this league. It's public perception and expectations. The expectations in New York were through the roof. They have completely bottomed out with this latest loss to the Colts. And public perception seeps into that building very easily. And Woody Johnson sees it very clearly when it happens. And like you joked, people in New York have opinions. The public perception of the organization is there. That's usually when jobs change. And here we are in a Jets organization that is in complete disarray. And the buzz around the league, not to talk too much around the Jets, but the buzz around the league is who wants this job?
Yeah.
Who really wants this job in the media market that it's in? I've heard, Ben Johnson really doesn't have any interest in going to a large market. He's probably one of the hottest names out there. You don't know what your quarterback situation is going to be. What if Aaron Rodgers wants to stay and you're the leading candidate for the job, but you don't want Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback at 41 years old? In the last season, what you've seen that he's put on tape is not what you want. You want to start fresh with the ability to have a different quarterback. Well, you might be at odds with ownership on that, which is something that's going to be difficult for them as well. And financially, they're going to be in a very difficult spot if they either have Aaron Rodgers retire or if they end up cutting him post June 1. Broncos fans know about dead money.
Yeah.
Jets fans are going to have quite a bit of it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you mentioned, the parameters are there. You're in market 1 in the country, the media market. There's very few people and teams that have more exposure on them than the 2 teams that play in New York. How much do you think Aaron Rodgers was truly an accelerant in this? I think that it's fair to assume that had something to do with the Robert Saleh departure because of perceived differences that may be happening with them behind the scenes in terms of how they want to scheme the offense and run the offense. Nathaniel Hackett's been demoted. Aaron Rodgers has already had a little bit of a reputation as a potential coach killer in that regard, and now it appears he might be able to add GM potentially to his hit list and all the pressure that comes with that.
Yeah, it's Aaron's an interesting cat by any stretch of how you want to phrase it. He has obviously said publicly repeatedly he doesn't have any say in anything that's going on. There are enough people around the league that know, he had a major play in Devontae Adams coming.
2 eyes and a brain.
Obviously, it's pretty simple. Alan Lazard is there. We've seen them bring in Nathaniel Hackett because he's tight with Aaron Rodgers. All of these things are undeniable by any stretch. They are undeniable. Now, whether he has any play in actually saying a head coach can be fired or a play and saying a general manager can be fired, I don't know if it goes that far, but I'll say his voice is very clearly heard by decision makers, and I don't think he hides his opinions. very clearly. I mean, Mike Williams ran one wrong route. That's hard to say. One wrong route. And he's not on the red line and he's traded. I mean, so I think you mentioned two eyes in a brain, Richie. Like, you can piece it together. I think people can piece it together. Is he directly going to Woody Johnson and saying, I think we should fire Joe Douglas? No, I don't think that's happening. But I think his opinion is very clearly heard in the building.
And let's just call a spade a spade. Drama is not exclusive to the one team that plays in New York. There's another team that plays in East Rutherford, New Jersey, that's experiencing a little bit of a shakeup. The benching of Daniel Jones coming down earlier this week. When you look back at the Daniel Jones trajectory and his kind of arc so far, he was never really a light the world on fire quarterback in college, and he has a pretty significant losing record as a starter in New York, and yet he's past his rookie contract. He signed a big money extension, relatively speaking. Yeah. And now it comes to an end. So my question to you, James, from your perspective and what you've heard around the league, why now?
Well, every season has a breaking point, and this was it for the Giants. When you essentially, no team wants to give up. No team wants to say, it's over for us this year. And you got to keep your guys motivated. You got to keep guys wanting to play every Sunday, and you got to keep your job as well as a staff. And so having that is always a difficult time when the season comes. Oftentimes it happens at the trade deadline for some teams. For the Giants, it was this week where they had the ability to evaluate during a bye week, to my understanding, right? Yeah, bye week. And then they had a chance to really have some added time to take a look. And money plays a major factor in this. I mean, they can't have Daniel Jones get hurt. They can't have money carry over. This is the end of Daniel Jones with the Giants. What I don't understand is if you paid $5 million for Drew Lock,
there,
decent money for a backup quarterback, that I think, talking to Drew last year, like what he had learned and how he had grew being in a very successful building. We're talking about buildings that have turmoil and cultural issues. That's not Seattle, right? Pete Carroll has run a really good job running that building up there. He learned a lot from Geno. He learned a lot from the good coaches that have come out of there over the last couple of years. And he felt like he was an even a better quarterback than he was, when he was in Denver.
Right.
You pay him $5 million, and now you're not going to play him. And I understand he had limited reps due to an injury in training camp, and you get to see him a whole lot. But the talent between him and Tommy DeVito is not even close. And to me, the financials that stand out are this. If you're going to pay Drew Lock $5 million not to pay him, take some of that $5 million and pay Saquon Barkley.
Yep. I was just going to say, I did see the statistic that I believe, and I could be wrong, that Saquon Barkley's cap hit for this season is $3.5 million, and Drew Lock is at $5 million. And the disparity in the production between those two. Now, I know that Tommy DeVito is who they have elevated for now. Do you think that holds, or are we just...
Well, Drew Lock is the backup. Yeah, Drew Lock's the backup, and Daniel Jones is not the backup. So that obviously shows you that this is financial. This is injury guarantee stuff. We saw this in Denver, honestly, with kind of playing a part in Russell Wilson losing the starting job. I don't know I would say DeVito's probably on a short leash. Yeah. And you're going to see Drew Lock at some point, because I don't think I'm the only one asking this question. I think everybody is. I think everybody's asking John Mara this question. I think the difference in these two buildings are, I don't get the sense they're moving on from the general manager, the head coach. I really don't. I think they want some stability. And I think Brian Dable's a really damn good coach.
I agree.
He really is. He didn't pick Daniel Jones. This is the situation he was thrown into. And we saw the role he played in the development of Josh Allen. And that was important. And so they made a massive mistake that is glaring, because Saquon Barkley is playing the way he's playing right down I-95 to their rival. And you don't want a $40 million quarterback handing it off to a $12 million running back. It's exactly what's happening in Philadelphia. I think it's a $50 million quarterback handing it off to a $12 million running back, and a team that is, what are they, 8-2? Or 9-2. Yeah, right. No, they've had a bye, so 8-2.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Whew. Yeah, it's disconcerting for Giants fans.
James, why does it seem, because I'm with you for the record, I think that we are just biding a little bit of time before we get the third act of the Drew Lock experience with a third different team. And I think that I think that he, in similar ways to the way we saw Russell Wilson change from when he was here in Denver to what we're now seeing in Pittsburgh, I think Drew has learned a lot over his stints and being put in the positions that he's been in. So I'll be curious to see that. But why does it seem that NFL teams, because when you lay it out, it feels pretty simple on the surface. Why is it that NFL teams seem to get caught into this vicious cycle of you bench a quarterback or you fire a coach who didn't have say in picking that quarterback, and then the GM process, and it just feels like you move on from all the parts in these staggered situations. And if you look at it, most prominently played out with the Chicago Bills, where they have a GM and a head coach and a quarterback who never seem to have any connection with each other. This GM didn't hire that coach didn't draft that quarterback. Why is it so hard to align these things when it seems so critical to the success and the trajectory of the franchise?
Because the NFL lacks patience. And there are too many firings. I mean, we've had 10 coaches fired in a season, or let's just like coaching changes. It could be a contract expires or a retirement, but like we've had 10 head coaching openings like 3 different times in the last like 8 years. Last year we had 8 head coach openings. The guess for this year is like 7 to 9, possibly 10 even. There's too much turnover. With that much turnover, you're going to continuously fall into those situations, whether it's not the same team over and over again, unless it's the Bears. Right. But like usually this happens time and time again. I use a perfect example of Arizona right now. Like you needed to hit the reset button. You hire the head coach and the general manager in lockstep, and Matty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon. They had an exact identity in mind in how they wanted that team to be built. They had an exact thought process on whether they should keep Kyler Murray or not. And they were in a position where they were drafting to go, do we keep Kyler Murray or do we not? They decided to keep him. Do we use this on a left tackle? Yeah. Do we get a star receiver the next year? Yeah. Do we become more physical and build a team that we want to have a physicality and be a big bodies around Kyler Murray? My point is not to go on about the Cardinals, but like there's a plan. That's a new turnover. There's a new turnover in Arizona, and there's a plan. Oftentimes you don't get enough time to see your plan into fruition. And rookie quarterbacks are playing right away. And let's be honest, most of the quarterbacks are misses just because it's just a crapshoot to evaluate. It's very difficult. I think this class is playing pretty well. But the lack of patience and the continuous turnover is something that we need to keep an eye on. And Roger Goodell has. Like, he's sent memos to these teams being like, you guys know how much money you're paying and coaches that are not coaching for you?
Yeah.
Like, and I think we should keep an eye on Jerry Jones, because I think Jerry kind of listened to that, or I don't know if Jerry listens to anybody, but he was also listening to being like, I don't know what the big deal is, guys. Like, let Mike McCarthy coach in his last year. If he coaches great, we'll sign a new contract. If he doesn't, we'll move on. You know what I mean? Like, instead of being like, let's keep firing coaches in year 2. It's fascinating, but it's why the good teams that have sustainability continue to remain good. It's why Pittsburgh stays good. It's why Kansas City stays good. It's why the Rams, even when they have massive roster turnover, they stay good. Denver wants to put themselves in that group to where, I think sneakily, I don't know if he gets enough respect in Denver. Like, George Payton's a really good general manager.
He's definitely the shine on him that seemed like it was wearing is seeming to come back a little bit with the emergence of some of his draft picks, most prominently like a Nick Bonito.
Nick Bonito, for sure.
And all of
Nick
that.
just needed to grow up, man. Like, not to interrupt you real quick, but I was talking to somebody about Nick the other day who's coached closely with him, and was like, he just came in immature. Like, and that's okay, right? Yeah. Like, these are young players coming into the league, and he needed to grow physically. He needed to grow mentally, handle the NFL game. Like, figuring out the NFL landscape is difficult. And now look at what he's doing. Like, we all want these guys. What are we talking about here? Lack of patience. Like, took him a minute. Okay. He's tied for second in the NFL in sacks. Like,
Which is no slouch. And I have a handful of questions I want to get to as it relates to the Broncos.
Let's do Broncos. Yeah.
Real quick, you mentioned Jerry Jones, and I have to talk to someone else about this because I'm dying. The phrase "everything is bigger in Texas" has plenty of evidence and merit behind it. the lift on the trucks, the people, if you ask someone like Charles Barkley. And apparently now the size of the debris that falls from the sky is bigger in Texas. I don't know that. I mean, actually, I think Broncos fans can relate to being like the embodiment of Murphy's Law as a franchise, where everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And that feels like where we're at with the Cowboys. You have a stud young kicker who gets selected for jury duty and has to rearrange his whole schedule. You've got a quarterback who you just paid $60 million a year, ending up on IR, and even when healthy, kind of underperforming at that. You've got an owner who's threatening the jobs of media members, subtly on the team partner flagship radio station. Debris falling from the sky. What is happening in Dallas, and what kind of long-term ramifications could we see beyond this season?
Yeah, it's a battle. Like whose dumpster fire is raging at a hotter heat? Is it the Jets or is it the Dallas Cowboys?
Right.
And look at what I said about the Jets, and it's true. Expectations and public perception, both massive in Dallas as well. Jerry welcomes those. There's a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
But like what the real problem, I think, in Dallas is a few things. One, I'm glad you want to talk about this. One, I had somebody in the building hit me up like, I can deal with the injuries. I can deal with, how we're playing defensively, what's happened with us having to deal with these injuries and depleting our performance. But you can't deal with unpreparedness, sloppy play, and undisciplined play. Like, that's just unacceptable. And that's there. And I said this a lot, and I felt like nobody listened. Maybe nobody listens to me in the first place. But like, I was like, Dan Quinn is going to be missed. And there are people in that building that miss Dan Quinn like crazy. Look at how quickly he built that culture in Washington and how quickly he turned that team around. He had guys, not just on defense, Richie, like on offense, that were in love with him, like just in love with him. Guess what? No, nothing against Mike Zimmer. Completely different personality, completely different coaching style. And you're going to ask all these guys to flip it on a switch and go back to playing the way DQ had them playing. That's tough. That's difficult on players. And then, you even throw on the fact that like people are dogging Dak's like toughness before they find out what the real injury is.
Right.
And like add that to insult. Like everything just is just gone wrong. But even the perception of how it's gone has gone wrong. The trade for Mingo, and the NFL people I talked to, was like, this is an embarrassingly bad trade. Like, this is like, what are you doing here? Like, they don't even need a receiver. Like, regroup, like figure something out in the trenches. Like, you got old guys like Zach Martin can barely stand, just warrior type players that have had unbelievable careers, and they're out there still trying to do it, and they can't even stand up. Like, it's so bad in Dallas, and the microscope is not going to get any smaller. What happens moving forward? You would assume a head coaching change. It's fun to talk about Dion to there and him and Shador or something like that. I mean, you can't get out of Dak's contract. I don't know what anybody's talking about. Like, you just can't get out of it. So that he's your quarterback. That's not changing. But they're definitely going to change head coaches, and they're definitely got to change what's going on there. I think Mike's a good head coach and a good coach, but just everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. They had no running game going into the season. They knew it. Like, they knew it going into the season. Like, Rico Dowdle's our best back. Zeke doesn't have anything left. Okay, then why didn't you do anything about it? You didn't go after Derrick Henry. You didn't go like. It's just
I can't imagine why we would expect, if Derrick Henry had gone to the Cowboys, that we would be seeing almost anything differently from Derrick Henry that we're seeing in Baltimore in Dallas, for a team that is just as well set up to maximize off of that and has been missing that, especially with the departure of Tony Pollard. It made no sense to me.
Yeah. But we're going to see him on primetime. Let's get to the Broncos.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, the expectation when you live in a play in a market like Dallas in the state of Texas, the expectation playoffs is kind of your floor, and the expectations are much higher. And that used to be the standard here in Denver for a long time. And it feels like we were never going to find that again. But now, with the emergence that Bo Nix has shown, especially in the last 6-7 weeks or so, after a little bit of a bumpy start, I am of the mind, James, that I think it's perfectly reasonable and almost necessary at this point to expect that this is a wild card playoff contending Broncos team with where they sit. What say you?
Yeah, if this trajectory continues is what I would say, right? Like, if the path we're seeing them on, Richie, right? Like, if that continues, I 100% agree. Like, they can't take any steps back. But
Yeah.
what we're seeing is this kind of snowball effect. I even
Mhm.
said it, like I've said it on the fan, like
Mhm.
talking to Phil and Zach. They're like, Phil was like, James, why are we not to think that they're not going to fall apart after this Chiefs win? And I was like,
Crushing, yeah.
I don't think they are. I said that. I was like, I don't think they're
Mhm.
going to fall apart because this is a really young team. I talked to people around the league about this. Sometimes when your team is real young, they're too, I don't want to say stupid, but they're like too naive and dumb
Yeah.
enough to realize the impacts of it. And they're just happy to be like out there again next week. Let's go. Like
Yeah.
we're starting to build. They're focused more on we're building this than they are about the crushing defeat of the Chiefs. And I think what they did this past Sunday, we were all there, like that proved that point emphatically. Like they beat him in every aspect you could beat a team, and they beat him badly. So like I think even the missteps, which is really that Chiefs game is one play, and even how well did they play against the Chiefs after the Baltimore loss on a defense that had their one slip up of the year. I think we're seeing week in and week out this continues to go. I'm looking at who's there with them, and like when I look at the Wild, like where they're at sitting at 7, like Indy, I don't see Indy competing with them. I see Miami being kind of dangerous and Cincinnati being kind of dangerous, honestly. Why? Because they have good offenses, they have good head coaches, and we don't know much about Anthony Richardson. I think they're going to be in a fight for the rest of the way out. I would say. I think the part that makes things harder on them is nobody's paying attention. The Chargers are really good.
Yeah,
the Chargers are really good. Somebody said this to me from another team in a front office this week. They were like, I'm not sure when nationally people are going to pay attention and find out that the Broncos and the Chargers are really good. And I was like, you're right. I'm in Denver. And that's what they're asking me. They were like, the Broncos are good. They're a good football team.
Yeah, listen, as a unit and as a locker room, when you get your butt kicked the way that they did against Baltimore, but even in that, again, if you're looking at it from a national perspective, where you're kind of 1,000-foot viewing of it, leading into halftime of that game, it was tight, it was contested. Bo Nix was taking care of the ball. He left the field. They gave up a quick score right before halftime. Baltimore comes out and scores on the first possession, and all of a sudden the rails are off, and it changes the entire dynamic of how you have to call the game offensively. The defense is on its heels and they're reeling a little bit, and as the strength of your team, that's not an advantageous position. But man, I'll say this: Bo Nix, after that first few weeks, where I mean, he was the first Broncos quarterback ever to not throw a touchdown in 3 first games of his career, but since then he's like 11-2 touchdown to interception ratio. He's top 5 or top 10 in most major passing metrics, and that is really the missing piece that we were saying all along of like, hey, this is a playoff contending caliber defense that they have. The offense now just needs to catch up, and it feels like we're seeing that. And there are people who I've heard locally, nationally, and beyond who are trying to maybe take a chip off of the shine of that blowout against the Falcons, saying, hey, look, the NFC South is not what it used to be, or not what we thought it would be with the way that the Saints have fallen off. Carolina's a disaster. Tampa Bay with all the injuries and all that. But I actually don't care about that, because I just look at what you had to cover that day on paper as a defense. You still had Kirk Cousins, a veteran, above average NFL quarterback who can make you pay. You still had Drake London. You still had Darnell Mooney, who's a top 5 receiver in a lot of statistical categories. You still had to deal with Kyle Pitts, who, albeit for being drafted 4th overall, maybe hasn't lived up to a lot of the hype and expectations year to year. He's still as much of a vertical threat as any tight end you're going to face in the NFL. Plus Bijan Robinson, plus Tyler Algier, who's an RB1 on, I'd say, I don't know what, maybe 10 teams in the NFL as a backup right now. It was still a tall task, and the Bo and the offense still had to go out there and score those points, and they did. And both sides of the ball did exactly what they needed to do. And so when you look at the path that's in front of them, you mentioned Indianapolis, Cleveland, they got the Vegas coming up more recently than that. I think those are 3 teams that on the surface are beatable. The Broncos are still young and figuring out that they don't have a lot of gimme games or like automatic check the box wins. They're just not there yet as a franchise. But I think the Raiders are all over the place. They're in a little bit of disarray. The Browns with Jameis Winston, I actually think, are more dangerous than they were with Deshaun Watson. I just think that Jameis is a little bit more versatile with where he's at as a quarterback right now. So that actually might hurt you a little bit. And then the Colts are now starting the quarterback that they had previously, and what seemed like emphatically benched at the time in Anthony Richardson. So I don't think it's unreasonable, again, to your point, if this trajectory continues, to see the Broncos go 2-1 in these games, if not 3-0, and really set yourself up to be a contending 10, maybe even more win team at the end of this month.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about them being a playoff team, and it's like, what do you need to be a playoff team? You need a really good defense, you need a playoff caliber head coach, and you need a quarterback. I think they have the first two in spades. Like, that's easy. You got a top 5 defense. You got a veteran head coach that has had a ton of postseason experience, and manages a game and calls a game really well. And then you're finding out that you have the quarterback. Like, you're finding out that you have a legitimate player at the quarterback position. Now, I would say, is he out there like making 1,000 plays? No, he's playing extremely efficient. He doesn't turn the ball over. He doesn't get sacked. He's growing every week. They're putting more on his plate, to my understanding, every single week. They can expand the offense as these weeks go by. He runs a very complicated offense very cleanly. Like, there's personnel groups that are constantly changing. I remember being on with Stoke like early in the season. He's like, James, why are they changing personnel every single play? And it's like, that's what Sean does. It's how he works. And he's telling like Bo, like, that's the way we do it. Sink or swim. And guess what? He's swimming. He's Michael Phelps, man. He's out there just like handling all of it. And so he's getting the ball into tight windows better than we've ever seen him. The throw over the middle to Devon Vele is the best throw he's made probably as a pro, into that tight window on the post over the middle. Devon Vele is becoming a viable weapon.
He really is.
I think we're not talking enough about Cortland Sutton. Like, this is 6 straight games now. I believe he has over 6 catches and over 70 yards. Right. I think it's him and Justin Jefferson that have done that over the last 6. I think that's it. That stat is like off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure that's accurate though. But he's been great, and the chemistry with Court and Bo has grown tremendously. So what did they do? Richie, they had issues, right? You banked on Greg Dulcich to be your joker, didn't work out. You pivoted, right? You banked on Javonte Williams being the back that they saw prior to the injury, and they really thought coming in this year he would be. It hasn't exactly been that. You've pivoted. Like, they found ways to kind of continue to grow as an offense, as a defense has held them in games. And to me, if Bo plays this efficiently and keeps making a handful of big plays and a handful of plays, and the defense plays the way they're playing, the special teams have been outstanding. It's a playoff team. Like, they are a playoff team. And I don't think you can really slice it any other way. Now, will that happen with a young team? We'll see. But I think they have solidified themselves as a legitimate playoff team.
Yeah, no, and I think you mentioned kind of like the formula and the makeup of a playoff team. And I think even if you take that on a little bit more of a micro level, in terms of a successful offense, at the NFL level, I think that the formula that you should have is you've got a quarterback who's first and foremost going to be smart with the football, not beat yourself and not turn it over. I think Bo has done, even when he's struggled, he hasn't struggled as much in a sense of being reckless with the football. And then you're going to need a head coach who's going to be able to scheme you open and scheme the offense in times, maybe 4 or 5 plays a game that are on the head coach. Hey, I need to draw something up that's an automatic win. I think we saw Sean Payton do that against the Falcons. There's 3 or 4 or 5 passes there that I think almost any starting quarterback in the NFL could have made, that, especially that first touchdown to Atkins. And then you're going to need, on the same token, 4 or 5 plays from your quarterback where you elevate above and beyond what the baseline is. And for Bo Nix, who is really dealing with Cortland Sutton and a lot of young and unproven or underwhelming skill position players in the running game and in the passing game, I think we saw that particularly head marked with that play to Vele. So I can't wait to see how this turns out. I'm thanking my lucky stars every day that we get to, and the fan base here gets to talk about meaningful football games in and around Thanksgiving and into December, because it doesn't happen very often. And we've touched on a handful of things. I wanted to close out here with a little bit of like an Overreaction Tuesday kind of thing, because I think there's been so much going on in the NFL that leads to kind of polarizing, swinging opinions one way or the other from fan bases whose hearts are definitely never impacting their judgment. So for the first Overreaction Tuesday, James, Bo Nix is a bona fide offensive rookie of the year candidate. Overreaction?
No. I think it's a 3-player race. I think it is Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, and Brock Bowers. I don't know if Brock will win. I honestly, sorry, Broncos fans, I think Brock deserves to win. A tight end has never won rookie of the year, ever. He's doing things right now we've never seen from a rookie tight end. And the position, not to take anything away from the quarterback's the most important position in all sports, but tight end is a pretty damn complicated position. Now he plays more of a receiver, but the guy's second in the NFL in catches. He's 9th in yards. He's 7th in yak. Like, he's going to break Mike Ditka's record for most receiving yards for a tight end in a rookie season. That record happened in 1961.
Yeah.
Like, he's going to break the catch record. He's going to shatter Sam Laporta's catch record from a season ago. And, oh, yeah, they don't have a quarterback, and they don't have any other offensive weapons. You know the ball's going to Brock Bowers. So I don't mind talking about him now because this is a big, deal that this is the guy you got to stop this week. He's been on an absolute tear. Like, this is who you got to slow down, and you need a plan for him. I mean, we did a breakdown on our show, Steve Smith and I, like, he is Travis Kelce 2.0. But I think the hot start by Jaden Daniels has overshadowed this recent stretch by Bo Nix. And I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's appropriate. Yep. I think there needs to be more credence to what Bo has done since week 4 than what Jaden did through the first 5.
Yeah, and there's so much, whether it's, rookie of the year, Heisman voting, all these things that we see, so much of it is predicated on timing and momentum and where you're at. And market. There you go. That's true.
Playing in DC, man.
Yep. So this one I think is significantly more of a stretch than I would say Bo Nix. But if you were a gambling man and you wanted to make a wager on coach of the year, let's say the Broncos win their next 3 games, they're in the driver's seat, sitting at 9-10 wins, and they're cementing themselves as a wild card playoff team. Could Sean Payton, who took on the largest dead cap hit in NFL history, moved on from Russell Wilson, drafted a rookie quarterback in the first round for the first time ever, and turned around a franchise that several before him have tried and failed over the last almost decade now, could Sean Payton be kind of a sneaky outside-the-box pick, long shot for coach of the year?
Yes. I don't even know if it's a long shot anymore if they keep playing the way they're playing. You're right. He's doing this with like a third of his salary cap is missing. Like, in terms of what you can financially put on the field, I think is unbelievable. I think you put that on top of the perception when I get a number of texts on draft night when I'm on with you guys at Dave and Buster's, people going, Bo Nix is a 3rd round pick. Like, this is what some teams really, really had him graded as. And they couldn't believe that he took him at 12. I think it's like, man, did in league circles, did Sean have egg on his face for a reach? And now has the egg been wiped off with a giant grin behind it? Yeah. And I think Mike Tomlin's probably,
I was going to say the competition is stiff. Tomlin, Dan Campbell, even Dan Quinn could probably, for some of the similar reasons to Sean Payton. Yeah.
Same reasons that D'Amico was in the running. I would put, Dan Quinn in the same deal. What I mean, like, that was a building that was in just disarray. The stadium's falling apart. Talking about Dallas, I mean, the whole stadium in Washington's falling apart. They got, ownership issues. And Dan Campbell's changed everything. Mike Tomlin's playing with 2 quarterbacks somehow. Nobody wants to do that, but he welcomed it and is thriving.
If you have 2 quarterbacks starting in the NFL, you have none unless you're Mike Tomlin.
Unless you're Mike Tomlin, who thinks he legitimately has 2 quarterbacks now. And he's going to start playing both of them, I think, even more. We started seeing Justin Fields this past week a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised. Red zone, we start seeing more Justin. But what Sean's done is, I was in Philly. It's a great example because I don't know how many more of these you have, so I don't want to go too long.
Oh, go ahead
on my answers. But I was in Philly for the Thursday night game. And I was talking to somebody's on the Eagles beat, and they were like, "Hey, is the Broncos defense for real?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's definitely for real." And then I go, "Name me 3 players on that defense that are not named Pat Surtain." One of them goes, does Steve Atwater still play for the Broncos?
Oh my God!
Joking. Like, that's more or less was his opener while he was trying to think. And both of them couldn't name 3 guys. So to me, that's also great coaching. It's great drafting, like we talked about with Sean Payton. They've put together a really good roster of really good role players. And name me some skill guys. Like, this team is built well without star power, and coaching plays a big part of that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that you're going to see the odds shift pretty dramatically if they continue on this path. And again, I just think it would be a testament to not only what he's done on the field, but the fact that he's brought he would have helped bring the Broncos back into relevance on a national scale and really be the driving, motivating factor behind resetting a culture that had just eroded so much since Peyton Manning walked out the door.
True.
I mentioned the Lions earlier with in Dan Campbell, and
I might put Jonathan Gannon in the mix. I mean, they're leading the the NFC West right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're in first place in his second season when they had an abysmal roster a year ago. That's been an impressive coaching job too. And Sean McVay is honestly coaching his tail off every single year.
Matthew Stafford, who was supposed to be washed, and they were ready to move on, and now they're right back in the mix for the division and look like they could be just as sneaky of an NFC team as the rest of them. With the NFC, and I'll admit that I might just have a little bit of personal bias and enjoyment because I've been waiting for this team to be good for a long time. And in the last handful of years, they've really maximized it. James, I am of the mind that the Detroit Lions are not only going to play in the Super Bowl, I think they're going to win the Super Bowl this year. Am I overreacting?
No, they're the best team in football.
I agree.
And honestly, I don't think it's even close. They can beat you so many different ways. They can out-physical you. They can explosive play you to death. Their offensive line is outstanding. They have 2 great backs. They have an all-pro wide receiver. They have an all-pro talent tight end that they don't even need to use that much, and they haven't. They have 2 of the hottest head coaching candidates running their offense and their defense in Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson. They're so well coached. And when you talk about culture, when I ask around the league, like there is something going on in that locker room that is not very normal. It is very rare what they've built. And they have an MVP candidate at quarterback. That was like 9th on my list. Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They have Jared Goff, who's an MVP candidate playing quarterback. They're the best team in football. And I don't think it's relatively close at all. When we saw another misstep from the Ravens, we saw over the last 2 weeks, and I'll put the Broncos performance in there as well, that the Kansas City Chiefs are very much mortal.
Yeah.
The tackle issue is glaring.
Yeah.
And they don't have, I was talking to a defensive coordinator about this week. They don't have anybody that can really separate. They don't really have, they have names, Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins, like they're having a hard time separating and it needs to be schemed open. The Lions, it's not an overreaction at all. They're the best team.
And I think a lot of people, I was going to say, I think a lot of people might have jumped onto that after the drubbing that they just gave the Jaguars. But to be honest with you,
what did Doug Peterson do to Dan Campbell?
I know. It's personal. There's something that we're missing there. And I felt this way about the Lions when they were a handful of plays away before getting knocked out of the postseason last year, where I thought they could have competed for it and won it last year. So they are so fun to watch, and I just can't get enough Dan Campbell.
One quick point on Dan Campbell, Richie, honestly, to me is like the win in Houston stands out because they played terrible and still beat a very good Houston Texans team. What does that show you? Like they did not play well, and they still expected themselves to win. And then 2, you look at San Francisco, and they got on the doorstep so many years in a row now. I've always been told it's hard to reset, man. Like you get almost there. But when you've got almost there once, the next year is like the hunger's like no other. And they know they should have not been knocked out of the postseason the way they were. So I think that adds to the Lions as well.
No, I couldn't agree more. And my last one here for you is, we've talked about it on this show specifically before, that it's well documented that today's NFL has a bona fide quarterback development epidemic. It's a problem. The amount of quarterbacks who were drafted high in the first round, who've been benched, that are still under the age of 26 and maybe on their second, going toward their third team at this point, it grows and grows with every passing year. But I think we've now seen 2 candidates for that category snatch life out of the jaws of death in Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, both who were benched at the midway point through the season, very publicly, very contentiously with their head coaches and all that, and the comments that were made publicly. And yet we now see them turning back and achieving maybe a little bit more success, or at least on par with what they were experiencing before. I am now, which I would have not said a month ago, I think Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson are both starting at quarterback for their teams next year and have reaffirmed the job security that they lost within the last month or so. Am I overreacting?
No. I'm trying to. I didn't say you were overreacting on any of these.
No,
Oh
No,
man,
I need to get.
we need to get more crazy with some of our
I
ideas.
guess I need to loosen it up a little bit more. I gotta be like,
you want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Yeah.
Anthony Richardson needed to play. Like he just needed to play. Like, and I understand the reset. What I was told was he had lost respect to the locker room with the pulling himself out. Go ask Matthew Stafford if he's ever pulled himself out of a game. I was literally at a game in Detroit once where they virtually carried him down the field. What was that Byron Leftwich back in the day at Marshall? And he threw the game-winning touchdown pass. Like those type of quarterbacks, the toughness of a Matthew Stafford type player, like they've never pulled themselves out.
I watched a game in college where Matthew Stafford dove forward on a run, separated his shoulder, dislocated his shoulder, called a timeout, had it popped back in on the sideline, then came in and dove over the pile for a game-winning touchdown at the end of the fourth quarter for another game-winning comeback. They don't make them very often like Matthew Stafford, and I think that's a high bar to chase. But I'll just say, I don't think it was the way it was trending, and I guess my follow-up to the overreaction question is, how much of the fact that I'm not overreacting to the Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson situation, say that a few times, Anthony Richardson situation,
that is good,
is because Andy Dalton had unfortunate timing and an unfortunate situation with a car accident that prevented him from fully taking over the reins from Bryce Young right after he was benched, and that Joe Flacco, for the first time ever in his life coming in as a backup, did not perform at an elite level. How much of that predicated into the return back to them and maybe some of that assured reassurance?
Well, yeah, I think the reset was actually legitimate in both, because at the trade deadline, my understanding was neither one was available. So that tells me that you weren't looking to recoup your assets, which obviously we know the Panthers gave up plenty of them to get Bryce Young. And so you weren't trying to get back on the right track, and he was not part of your future. So both of them were not available. That's telling to me that they were, the organizations had not given up on them. Yeah. Obviously, I mentioned Anthony Richardson needed a reset. He needed a reset in terms of commitment in meetings, weight room, practice field, locker room, all of those things. They felt like that was established. That was going to happen at some point, probably, whether it was going to be the start of next year, whether it was going to be later in this year. I don't know, but I don't think Shane Steichen hand-picking him in his first head coaching opportunity was going to give up on him that quickly. I do think Bryce's situation is a little different when what he went through in his rookie year is literally like football developmental malpractice, just the worst situation, talking to enough people there that you could put a kid through in their rookie season with the coaching staff and the turmoil that he had to go through. I think his confidence, from what I was told, was just absolutely shattered for a variety of reasons. And now I think the reset for both of them, and maybe a little bit of patience, which we started earlier as we close this up, is lacking in the NFL, allowing these guys to regroup and kind of come back. It goes back to the Broncos in this year when it started. I said the only thing you needed to learn this year was if Bo Nix is the guy.
Yep.
So you need to find out if Anthony Richardson is the guy and if Bryce Young's the guy. That's all you need to figure out. I hate to say it, and everybody else in the locker room doesn't like it. Yeah, there's veterans in the locker room that, they're looking to win games, and they're upset by that philosophy. But if you don't have one, you don't have one, and you can't compete. So the Broncos found out they have one, and now they're just like stockpiling on top of it in terms of other goals they want to achieve this year. And I think those other two organizations are figuring out if it's the guy, and you can't do that if they don't play. But the reset was necessary in both instances. So not an overreaction. I think they're both starting for their teams next year. I'll leave it at that.
Well, listen, if there's one thing that we know about the NFL is that it will never leave us with a shortage of things to talk about. I feel like we could go on for another 50 minutes if we really wanted to. James, it is always a pleasure chatting with you, picking your brain, and just having the opportunity to get your thoughts and insight on so many things. And I can't wait to do it again next year. Next week.
I was like, what's happening? Yeah, next year,
next week, where I will get you to tell me I'm overreacting on something. I'm determined.
Find some more stretches. It should have been overreacting. Like Sean Payton will win Coach of the Year, not is he in the conversation.
Good point. Well, like I said, I'm not above coaching. I'm going to take those notes. I'm going to digest them. And next week, next week, I am going to come up with some inflammatory statements that may still be true, or I might be overreacting. James, always a pleasure, man. Thank you for joining us.
All right. See you, buddy.
All right. Everybody else, have a great rest of your day and get back to work.
Yeah.